The MS Society created quite an online kerfuffle when they published an Instagram post titled, "Can MS be inherited?" The biggest bone of contention was their statement that MS is not an inherited disease. It created quite a frenzy of comments. So what is the relationship between genetics and MS? Stay tuned to find out more. Welcome to Disability UK. I'm Joy, an occupational therapist and disability advocate living with multiple sclerosis. I'm here to deconstruct myths about disability and make science a little more accessible. So let's dig into the myths and misunderstandings of how genetics plays a role in the development of genetic diseases like MS. As I said in the intro, the MS Society was trying to provide some education on the difference between inherited diseases and genetic diseases. Because Instagram requires content creators to make really simplified posts, it's not the best forum for educating people on really complex topics. In my initial comment to the MS Society's post, I very much oversimplified the genetics involved. I mean, how do you get into the complexities of genetics when trying to post a comment on Instagram? It's not really the best forum for providing education on complex and ever-evolving topics. As I reread my post, my attempts at simplifying this complex topic resulted in missing out on some very important nuances. All that to say that instead of posting comments like this in the future, I'm just going to make a video so that I can include the research, dive deeper into the topic, and provide links to sources. So let's get into multiple sclerosis, genetics, and inherited diseases. So what's the difference between a genetic disease and an inherited disease? The best answer to this question came from Veritas International, a genetic testing company which does a great job of explaining the nuances of this topic without dragging us too far into the weeds. Many times, the words genetic and hereditary are used interchangeably, but there are distinct differences between the terms. Let's start with talking about genes. In its simplest form, a gene is a bit of information that creates life. You can use many analogies like a blueprint to build a house or a code for a computer program. While these analogies help us grasp the concept, genes are much more complicated than building a house or writing a computer program. One major role of genes is to code for proteins. Proteins have many important and varied roles in the body, from building tissue to acting as a messenger to balancing the body's pH levels. Humans have evolved to pass on their genes through reproduction. Now is a good time to do a quick review of basic inheritance. Most of us would have first learned about genetics and inheritance through Mendel and his experiments with pea plants. Mendelian inheritance refers to conditions or traits that are caused by a single gene. Because these traits are only caused by a single gene, it's easy to predict how this gene will be passed on from generation to generation. You may have remembered drawing Punnett squares, where you can determine the possible genetic combinations of offspring based on the parent's genetics. These Punnett squares allow geneticists to determine the probability that the offspring of two people will have certain traits or characteristics, such as blood type. We often hear this described as the child has a 75% chance of inheriting X condition or X trait. There are still many conditions that are inherited in this way. However, we've learned a lot more about genetics and gene mutations that lead to disease since the 1800s, when Mendel was around. When we talk about gene mutation or changes to our genes, we often talk about it in relation to disease. Mutation, though, is just the term we use to describe a permanent change to a gene. It's important to remember that genes often mutate. Sometimes these mutations give us traits that help us. Many times, these mutations go undetected as they don't have any impact on our survival. Other times, the genes mutate and cause disease. So let's go back to Veritas and the difference between genetic disease and inherited disease. As they so eloquently put it on their website, all hereditary diseases are genetic, but not all genetic diseases are hereditary. This is where we start to talk about germline cells and somatic cells. Germline cells refer to the egg and the sperm cells. We don't often think about sperm and egg as cells, but that's what they are. Germline cells are sex cells. If the mutation has occurred in the germline, that is the sex cell, it's called an inherited disease. Cystic fibrosis and Duchenne's muscular dystrophy are examples of inherited diseases where the mutation has happened in the sex cells and is passed on from parents to their offspring. We can use Mendelian genetics to get a rough idea of the probability of the condition being passed on to any offspring if we know the genetics of both parents. Of course, advances in genetic testing have brought far more accuracy to the picture since Mendel's day. All other cells, that is, any cell that is not the sperm or the egg, is called a somatic cell. Mutations in these cells will not be passed on to their offspring. For example, someone may go out and get lots of UV exposure from the sun. Exposure to that radiation causes a genetic mutation in the skin cells, resulting in skin cancer. That person would not pass skin cancer on to their children because the mutation happened in the somatic skin cell, but the genetic information in their sperm or egg is unchanged. Think about when you go to get an X-ray, which is a form of radiation. A lead apron is placed over your vital organs, including your pelvis. The lead prevents the radiation from causing mutations in your egg or sperm cells, which could then be passed on to your children. It also protects against mutation of any other cells in the body that would not be passed on to your children. Finally, it's important to note that not all genes are turned on all the time. There are many genes that don't ever express themselves. That is, they never create a protein, or the body never reads or follows the instructions on that gene. Sometimes a gene will be turned off until there is an environmental trigger, where the gene all of a sudden turns on and starts pumping out instructions. You could live your whole life with a gene for a disease, but never have the disease because that gene doesn't get turned on. Alternately, you could live a chunk of your life with a gene for a disease and have no symptoms until you unluckily come into contact with an environmental trigger that turns that gene on. So how does this all relate to MS? Let's start by taking a look at breast cancer. 5 to 20% of all cancer is hereditary. That means that the mutations causing the cancer are passed on through the egg and sperm. In terms of breast cancer, you may have heard that some women are getting tested for the BRCA1 gene. This gene is passed on through the germline cells and is a form of hereditary cancer. For those with breast cancer who test negative for the BRCA1 gene, it is most likely that their cancer is from mutation of a somatic cell and won't be passed on to their children. Therefore, it is not considered a hereditary disease. Of course, genetics is complicated, and scientists may find more genes responsible for breast cancer that can be passed on via the germline. So let's talk about MS. Currently, 1.5 to 2.7% of MS cases may be hereditary. Unlike with breast cancer, scientists haven't found any single gene that is responsible for developing MS. In fact, they think there are hundreds of genes that contribute to the development of MS. However, in approximately 1 to 3% of MS cases, there seems to be a strong genetic link where the MS-related genes are more readily passed on. The people responding to the MS Society post are pointing this out. However, it's also important to note that people that share genes often also share environment. For example, maybe the sperm and egg are fine, but everyone in the family is exposed to the same contaminant that affects their somatic cells. This would look like an inherited disease, but since the egg and sperm aren't the source of the mutation, it would be considered a genetic disease. Because scientists haven't found a single gene responsible for MS in the germline, it's much, much more difficult to predict if it will be passed on to children. For 97% of us with MS, our genetic disease is caused by mutations in the somatic cells. In my family, I'm the only person with MS, but I do have multiple family members with other autoimmune diseases. So it's highly unlikely that I inherited mutated genes from my mom and dad that caused my MS. Instead, some interaction occurred between my genes and the environment. Maybe this interaction mutated my somatic cell genes in a way that caused MS. Maybe the interaction turned on dormant genes that go on to cause my immune system to go haywire. As unsatisfying as it is, we just don't know. There are many factors that scientists suspect may increase your risk for MS. However, it's always going to be a combination of environment and genetics. For example, scientists have discovered that some viruses, such as the Epstein-Barr virus, can help trigger MS. However, many people get this virus and do not go on to get MS. This means that there has to be another component, likely genetic and highly complex, that ultimately leads to developing MS. Right now, the best conclusion that we can make is that for most people, MS is not an inherited disease. There isn't a single gene that scientists have connected with MS, and it is highly unlikely that an MS-causing genetic mutation is present in the sperm or egg cells. Based on current evidence, people with MS inherit a genetic risk of MS through changes in interactions between 200 or more genes. However, they won't develop MS unless something in the environment triggers the many genes involved in creating MS. Currently, we have lots of evidence to show that MS is definitely a genetic disease, where something in the environment interacts with our unique genetics to create the condition we call MS. At this point, scientists cannot say that MS is an inherited disease passed on by parents to their offspring through mutation of one gene, because that gene has not been identified. In the future, scientists may be able to identify a single gene passed on through sex cells that significantly increases the risk of developing MS, like they did with breast cancer. If that time comes, then scientists may be able to identify certain cases in which MS is strictly inherited. Or scientists may discover a combination of environmental triggers that cause all cases of MS, and some families are more likely to be exposed to one or more of those triggers. This might make MS look like an inherited disease, but because an external trigger is present, it is considered a genetic disease. Until we have more information, MS will continue to be described as a genetic disease in which MS is caused by our genes being triggered by something in the environment. And while viruses are one thing that scientists believe can trigger MS, they are investigating a whole list of things that could be responsible. As we've learned with many, many things, MS comes down to part genetics and part environment. Lots of people may have the hundreds of genes that can cause MS, but for whatever reason haven't been exposed to enough triggers for those genes to cause MS. At the end of the day, there's a lot we don't know about what causes MS. When we don't understand the cause of something, it can be really difficult to come up with effective treatments or cures. Luckily, there have been great advancements in treatment, but there still isn't a cure. Also, for some of us, the treatments just stop working, and we don't know why. Doing more research on MS genetics and triggers can help us learn about the varying ways genes and environment interact to create the disease we call MS. In the future, this research will hopefully lead to more specific treatments or maybe even a cure. While it can be frustrating to keep up with the changing science, it's actually a good thing to be able to identify what we don't know and to build on what we do know. I hope this video helps clarify the difference between inherited diseases and genetic diseases. Let me know your thoughts or questions in the comment section below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.